Hello, AP US history students. Mr. Lugiai here, coming at you live from Sunday. Chicago Bears just won the first NFL game of the season for them. Really exciting stuff. I'm going to try and keep this to less than 10 minutes. My first video was a little long, and I know some people's attention went like, but it'll be things like that. We are going to be talking today about Chapter 2, where we're going to start to focus in on the English colonies in North America. And eventually that is going to lead to the American Revolution and the creation of the United States. So we're starting to get a little bit closer in history. Once again, these are the main topics we're going to cover today. And we'll talk a little bit more in class about all of this. So first off, periodization. Why does the textbook go from 1607 to 1754? Well, hopefully you remember 1607, big date. It's the date of the establishment of Jamestown, Virginia, which is going to be the longest continuously habitated British colony in North America. And then 1754 is going to be the start of the French and Indian War, where we're really going to begin to break away even farther from England until eventually the Declaration of Independence. So, who's coming at this time for England? Today's going to be all about England. Well, the people that are coming to settle these new colonies are going to be the lower margins of society, of English society, and religious fanatics as well. Those people that do not feel safe to practice their religion in England are going to come to North America to try to establish these colonies and to live out their lives. The British pay very little attention to these people at the time. In fact, for some of these groups, they're actually excited to have them leave their little island and go across the sea. They're going to be able to tax them and use them to bring natural resources back to England. It also gets them out of the hair of the immediate crown. And to everybody's surprise at this time, they do succeed and they become very successful. And eventually, they create 13 British colonies that are going to form the eventual United States of America. By 1720, the economy of the colonies and the gross domestic product is going to begin to rival even that of Great Britain itself. So that's the periodization. That's why we chose those two time periods. If we move on to contextualization, kind of what's happening before and why there is this new rush to to England colonizing North America, when we've been talking about Spain, France, and the Dutch colonizing in the 15 and 1600s, the Protestant Reformation is happening in England at this time. And obviously, for those of you that are not familiar, the Protestant Reformation starts with the Tudors and Henry VIII, who begins to say, maybe we should not be a Catholic empire. Let's form a new sect of Christianity called Protestantism. And eventually, with Elizabeth I and the successful win against Spain with the destruction of the Spanish Armada, England becomes the largest and most powerful Protestant nation in the world. Now, Elizabeth I, because she's trying to stop Catholic Spain from invading, we have a Christian religious war here, Catholics versus Protestants. She creates this huge navy, an armada. And now that England has a big navy, you're going to use that navy. So they begin to send their navy across the Atlantic Ocean to North America to begin colonizing and then protecting British colonies that are coming to America. So wars are really going to lead to that. So that's the kind of the contextualization on the Protestant Reformation. One big thing, one big takeaway that I took from this chapter is the creation of corporations and the use of corporations in establishing colonial rule. Now, corporations are going to be very different from French and Spanish settlers that are going to come. And we see that in order to establish a corporation, the whole purpose is England needs colonies in order to make money. And they are going to empower, at first, individual wealthy people, but then eventually they're going to empower businesses to create colonies on their behalf, and they're going to tax those colonies. Originally, in the late 1500s, early 1600s, wealthy individuals in England are going to try to establish these colonies to not great success. Should be familiar with the colony of Roanoke, which is established by an individual, does not succeed because they don't have the backing of a number of people in Great Britain who are trying to, push them, to help them, succeed. And that all really changes with the creation of something called a joint stock company. And today in 2020, we still use joint stock companies. Basically, we're able to have a group of individuals and a group of companies pool their resources and money together so that we can really financially back the colonies and the colonists. Now, because you have more money, because you're allowing more people to come in, it limits your risk. So if something like Roanoke happens, it's not going to ruin your company altogether. It obviously does limit your reward, though, but colonies almost become a surefire thing with the creation of joint stock companies. And eventually, when a joint stock company gets powerful enough, the English crown is going to issue a royal charter, just like they did with Jamestown, Virginia. And we're going to talk about Jamestown right now. So, change over time in terms of Virginia in particular really has to start from company to society with the establishment of Jamestown in 1607. The original inhabitants of Jamestown are going to be higher class English gentlemen, as I like to call them. They're looking for gold and they're looking to invade Spanish forts and Spanish towns in order to pillage them as much as possible. But it turns out there's not a lot of gold in Virginia, and the Spanish are several hundred and sometimes thousands miles away. So there's no real way for them to pillage these areas. And this just simply did not work. It was not a winning atmosphere. As hopefully you read, the beginnings of Jamestown, very, very poor. We call it the starving times, actually, in the beginning of Jamestown, because people were looking for gold. They weren't farming. They didn't care about, raising crops, getting animals to slaughter. They just wanted to find gold and book it back to England with all that gold. And eventually, this is going to lead to mass starvation, where a number of citizens of Jamestown succumb to starvation, and then others succumb to cannibalism in order to stay alive. Um, of course, the story, John Smith comes to Jamestown, establishes order. Everybody's going to have a job. Everybody's going to work. You're going to have Sundays will be your only day off. But we're going to find crops. We're going to raise animals, and we're going to make this profitable. And the reason why Jamestown becomes profitable, as much as we'd love to give credit to John Smith, really is the creation, or not the creation, but bringing tobacco to Virginia. And John Wolfe is going to be the person that brings tobacco to Jamestown in Virginia. And eventually, Jamestown becomes a plantation settlement where we have hundreds and thousands of acres surrounding Jamestown growing tobacco plants, shipping that back to Europe and making a tremendous amount of money for the individual people there. For those stockholders, for the joint stock companies, Jamestown is not going to be successful at all. They're pumping so much money in just to try to get it going and to keep people alive and to make sure that it works, that it becomes a null investment by 1624. And at that point, the joint stock company basically allows the royal crown to come in and take over all aspects. That's why Virginia becomes really the foothold of the English colonies at this time. So that's going to be from the creation of a company to a society where we see that. So for our comparison piece, we're going to compare New England with the Chesapeake region. Chesapeake's going to include Virginia and Jamestown as well. And that area really, by the time the mid-1600s into the 1700s, is going to be made up of a lot of lower class people coming from England to make a quick buck, and a lot of indentured servitudes. They're going to be creating these cash crops, tobacco, eventually cotton as well. There will be wealthy plantation owners. There will be wealthy individuals, but those few and far between wealthy Southern Chesapeake individuals are going to be surrounded by a multitude of extremely lower class people. Whereas in New England, we see the creation of towns and the creation of cities. It's going to be more of a middle class, working class, and upper class with families. Think of like Naperville if we didn't have cars or electricity, this middle to upper class, very family oriented, where there's an economic system. People have blue collar jobs, and it's really a very high level functioning society. Now, there are some similarities between New England and the Chesapeake. Primarily, there's going to be a massive amount of conflict with Native Americans, and they both are going to establish governments or legislators. Virginia, in particular, has the first legislation in North America, the House of Burgess in 1619. It becomes a very wealthy and rich tradition of self government as we get closer to the American Revolution. For our causation section on chapter 2, we're going to take a look at class warfare when it comes to Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion is going to be a Virginia class uprising. The long-term causes of Bacon's Rebellion are basically going to be land rights, voting rights, and participation in government. In order to, in Virginia, and in fact, almost all of the Chesapeake region, in order to have kind of a say and a vote in the society, you had to own land. Uh, by the time of Bacon's Rebellion, a quarter of the colonists did not own land. White males did not own land, so they did not have a vote. They could not run for a seat in the House of Burgess, and their needs, they feel, really are not going to be met in any way, shape, or form. The short-term conflicts is going to be an uprising on the western frontier of Virginia between Native Americans and white settlers. These white settlers are going west because they don't have land, and where there is land for the taking is going to be on the western frontier of Virginia. So they think, like, if we go farther west, we can settle, which means we now get to vote. We get a say in the government, and that really idea of no taxation without representation comes to a head. Now, following these native uprisings, because the Virginians are literally stealing native land, the natives are going to fight back against them. The governor of Virginia does not send troops. He does not really make a public comment. He just says, you went west against our orders. You're on your own. And a extremely privileged, we're going to call him like a crybaby, basically, Nathaniel Bacon hates that. Nathaniel Bacon is wealthy, but he's able to rally a number of lower class, poor white Virginians against the government. Bacon's big problem is the government itself, not that the government's not helping the poor. So what we see, Nathaniel Bacon rallies these poor on the western frontiers. They go to Jamestown, the capital of Virginia, and they burn it to the ground. They burn the governor's mansion, they burn the House of Burgess down, and they really occupy the seat of Virginian government. Eventually, the crowd disperses, and Virginia kind of takes back control of Jamestown. But the long-term impact is Virginian elite realize we have a problem. We need to allow a lot of these people to vote, but we still need to have them have land. So they're going to actually sanction. They're going to go from saying you can't go west to sanctioning westward expansion, which is going to allow a lot of those people to kind of establish themselves in Virginia and North America as a whole. Another long-term impact of Bacon's Rebellion is going to be the beginning end of indentured servitude. That basically means wealthy upper-class Virginians would pay for poor Europeans to come and work their fields, and you wouldn't get paid, but you would, for a period of 5 years, you will work my fields for free, and we will, we'll feed you, we'll house you, but you can't leave. And eventually, indentured servitude, because that was very costly, is going to be replaced by race-based slavery in Virginia, which is going to lead to a nation that begins as a slave nation and has to fight a civil war in order to end that. So those are the main takeaways from this chapter. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, let me know. We're going to be talking this week about the rise of English colonies. Take it easy.